The morning sun crawled across the New Mexico plateau like a dying thing, casting long shadows over the parched earth of Iron Root Ranch. Ellie Rollins stood on her porch, squinting against the harsh light, her weathered hands gripping a cup of chicory coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The liquid was bitter as alkali water, but coffee beans were a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. At 30, she looked older. The desert had a way of aging a woman fast, carving lines around her eyes and mouth like dry riverbeds. Her auburn hair, once her pride, was pulled back in a severe bun, streaked with premature gray. She'd been alone for 6 months now since Samuel's accident, and every day felt like a year. The barn stood 50 yards away, its roof partially caved in where Samuel had been fixing loose boards. Such a simple thing, a man going up to patch his barn roof on a clear Tuesday morning. The wood had been more rotted than he'd thought. The crossbeam gave way. He'd fallen 20 feet onto the packed earth floor. Doc Whitman said he died quick, which was supposed to be a comfort. Ellie set down her cup and walked toward the vegetable garden. Though calling it a garden was generous, the corn stalks were stunted, barely knee-high when they should have been towering over her head by now. The bean plants had shriveled in the July heat, their leaves curled like arthritic fingers. The well was running low again. She'd hauled up more silt than water yesterday. "Lord, if you're listening," she murmured, kneeling to check the soil. "I could use a miracle about now." The soil crumbled between her fingers like ash. Everything was dying, just like Samuel's dream of building something lasting out here in the high desert. He'd been so sure they could make it work, had borrowed against next year's harvest to buy seed and supplies. Now those debts hung around her neck like a millstone. The sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 riders were coming down the trail, dust devils swirling in their wake. She recognized the lead rider immediately, Jedediah Moore, sitting his black stallion like he owned the world. Which, in a way, he did. Half the county owed him money or worked his land. The Sequoia Ranch sprawled across 30,000 acres, swallowing up smaller homesteads whenever drought or death gave him the opportunity. Ellie stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirts. She walked back to the porch, stopping near the door where Samuel's Winchester hung on pegs. She didn't reach for it, but she wanted Moore to know it was there. Mrs. Rollins. Moore touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. He was a big man, soft around the middle from good living, with pale eyes that reminded her of a snake's. His 2 companions, she recognized one as his foreman. Jake Cotter stayed mounted behind him. "Mr. Moore," she kept her voice steady. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Now, Ellie?" He smiled, showing too many teeth. "No need for such formality between neighbors. I've come to make you an offer. A generous offer. Considering. I'm not selling. You haven't heard my terms." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. $300. Cash money. Enough to get you back east. Start fresh. Maybe find yourself another husband. Have some young ones while you still can. The insult burned, but she kept her face still. "My husband's buried on this land. I'm not leaving." Moore's smile faded. "Your husband's debts are coming due. Mrs. Rollins. The banknotes for $400. Unless you've got a strong box hidden somewhere. You'll lose this place anyway. Take my offer. It's more than fair." "Fair," the word came out sharp. "This land's worth 5 times that with water rights." "Was worth?" Moore leaned forward in his saddle. "Your well's near dry. Haven't seen your creek running since April. Land without water ain't worth spit." Ellie's jaw tightened. The creek had mysteriously dried up right after Samuel's death, but she couldn't prove anything. "I'll find a way to pay. With what, that pitiful corn, the 6 scrawny cattle you got left?" He shook his head. "I'm trying to help you, woman. This ain't no life for a lady alone. Things happen out here. Accidents." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jake Cotter shifted in his saddle, his hand resting casual-like on his pistol. "My offer stands till month's end." Moore continued. After that, the bank takes over. They won't give you 300. They won't give you 30. He wheeled his horse around, his men following. As they rode off, Moore called back over his shoulder, "You think on it, Mrs. Rollins. Think real hard." Ellie watched until they disappeared over the rise, then let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were trembling. She clenched them into fists, nails biting into her palms. Inside the house, she pulled out the strongbox from under the loose floorboard. $23 and change. The banknote stared up at her, the numbers swimming before her eyes. $400. Might as well be 4,000. She walked to the barn, needing to do something, anything. The milk cow, Bessie, lowed softly as she entered. At least she still had Bessie, though the poor thing was giving less than a quart a day on the sparse feed. "It's all right, girl," Ellie murmured, running her hand along the cow's flank. "We'll figure something out." But would they? She'd sold everything worth selling. Samuel's good saddle, her mother's silver brushes, even her wedding ring, though that had nearly killed her to do, all for a few more weeks of borrowed time. The afternoon wore on, relentless heat pressing down like an iron. She worked until her back screamed, hauling water, tending the animals, trying to coax life from dead soil. When evening finally came, she was too tired to eat, just sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I don't know what to do, Sam," she whispered to the darkness. "I'm trying, but I don't know how much more I got in me." The coyotes answered from the distant hills, their calls echoing across the desert. Lonely sounds for a lonely land. She'd never felt the isolation as keenly as now, with no neighbors for miles, no one to turn to. The nearest town was a day's ride, and what friends they'd had there had their own troubles. She thought about Moore's offer. $300. Enough to get back to Missouri, maybe find work as a seamstress or governess, start over where green things grew without a fight, where water came easy from the sky. But then she looked out at the land, bathed in moonlight, the mesa rising to the north, the canyon cutting deep to the west. Samuel had loved this place, had seen something in it worth dying for. Not deliberately, but he'd worked himself into an early grave trying to make it bloom. "I can't leave you, Sam," she said softly. "Not yet." Tomorrow she'd ride to town, see if anyone needed washing done or had work for a woman willing to do it. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She'd beg if she had to, anything to hold on a little longer. As she rose to go inside, a sound made her freeze. The horses in the corral were stirring, nervous. She heard it again, a low groan, almost human. Her heart hammered as she lit a lantern and took the rifle from its pegs. Could be a wounded animal, could be worse. She'd heard stories of Apache raids, though there hadn't been trouble in these parts for 2 years. She followed the sound, moving carefully, the rifle heavy in her arms. It led her toward the canyon edge, where the land dropped away into darkness. The lantern threw wild shadows on the rocks. There, at the base of a shallow ravine, a dark shape, too still to be natural. She held the lantern higher, and her breath caught. A man lay crumpled among the rocks, his body twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. Blood, dried black in the moonlight, covered his chest and legs. An Apache warrior. From the look of his dress, though torn and filthy, she should leave, turn around, go back to the house, bar the door, let the desert take him like it took everything else. That's what Samuel would say, what any sensible person would say. But something held her there. Maybe it was the way his fingers clutched at the earth, even unconscious, the way his breath came in shallow, desperate gasps. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of death, tired of watching things slip away. "Damn fool," she muttered, not sure if she meant him or herself. She'd decide in the morning what to do. For now, she'd just check if he was past helping. That wasn't wrong. Was it just common decency? But even as she started down the ravine, lantern held high and rifle ready. Ellie Rawlins knew she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed, in a land that took everything. Maybe it was time she took something back, even if it damned her. The descent into the ravine was treacherous. Loose stones scattered under Ellie's boots, threatening to send her tumbling down alongside the wounded man. She set the lantern on a flat rock and approached carefully, rifle still ready. Up close, the damage was worse. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle below the knee, the bone clearly broken. Dark stains covered his buckskin shirt, and when she held the lantern closer, she saw the ragged hole in his shoulder, a bullet wound, days old by the look of it. Fever had taken hold, even in the cool night air. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was young, maybe 25. His face, beneath the dirt and blood, had strong features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips cracked from dehydration. Black hair fell past his shoulders, matted with dried blood. Ellie stood there for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If anyone found out she'd helped an Apache. She thought of the stories from the war years. Settlements burned, families killed, but those were stories. This was a man, broken and dying at the bottom of a ravine. She climbed back up and fetched Bessie's old hauling cart, the one Samuel had used for bringing in firewood. Getting the Apache onto it took every ounce of strength she had. He groaned when she moved him, his eyes fluttering open briefly, dark eyes, unfocused with pain and fever. He muttered something in a language she didn't understand before losing consciousness again. The trip back to the ranch was agonizing. Every bump and rut sent fresh groans from her passenger. By the time she reached the barn, her arms were trembling from the effort. She couldn't bring him to the house, too visible if anyone came calling. The old tack room at the back of the barn would have to do. It was small but dry, with a door she could bar from inside. By lantern light, she made a pallet of old horse blankets. Moving him again was torture for them both. When she tried to straighten his broken leg, he came fully awake with a strangled cry, his hand shooting out to grip her wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," she said, though she doubted he understood. "I'm trying to help." His eyes focused on her face, taking in her features, her dress, the cross at her throat. Something like confusion flickered across his features before the pain took him under again. Ellie had helped Samuel with injured horses, had even assisted Doc Whitman once when a ranch hand got gored by a bull. But this was different. She cut away the ruined shirt, revealing the infected bullet wound. The smell made her gag rot had set in. She knew what had to be done. In the house, she boiled water, gathered clean rags, found the bottle of whiskey Samuel had hidden in the root cellar. Her mother's sewing kit provided needles and thread, though her hands shook at the thought of using them on human flesh. Back in the tack room, she lit 2 more lanterns and laid out her supplies. The Apache was conscious again, watching her with those dark eyes. When she approached with the whiskey, he tried to pull away. "For the pain," she said, miming drinking, "and for cleaning." She wasn't sure if he understood, but when she pressed the bottle to his lips, he drank. She gave him as much as he'd take, then took a swig herself for courage. The next hour was the longest of her life. She cleaned the wound as best she could, cutting away dead flesh with Samuel's sharp skinning knife. The Apache never cried out, though his whole body went rigid with pain, muscles standing out like cords. His breathing came in short, controlled bursts through clenched teeth. When she poured whiskey directly into the wound, he did make a sound, a low, guttural growl that raised the hair on her arms. His hand found a piece of leather, an old bridle, and he bit down on it hard enough to leave teeth marks. The bullet had passed through. Small mercy. She packed the wound with clean cloth soaked in whiskey and carbolic acid from her medicine box. The sewing was crude but tight. By the time she finished, both of them were drenched in sweat. The leg was another matter. She'd seen Samuel set a horse's leg once, knew the basic principle, but this break was bad. The bone displaced. She'd need to pull it straight, then splint it. "This is going to hurt," she warned, positioning herself at his feet. She thought she saw him nod, just slightly. He gripped the wooden rails of the makeshift bed, knuckles white. When she pulled, the sound that tore from his throat was barely human, but the bones aligned with a wet click that made her stomach turn. Working quickly, she bound the leg between two straight boards from a broken crate, wrapping it tight with strips torn from an old sheet. It was past midnight when she finished. The Apache had passed out again, which was a mercy. She covered him with another blanket, then sat back on her heels, exhausted. What had she done in the morning light? This would seem like madness. She should go to town, report finding a wounded Indian, let the authorities handle it. That was the law, the sensible thing. But looking at him lying there, fighting for each breath, she knew she wouldn't, couldn't. Maybe it was the way he'd endured the pain with such dignity. Maybe it was just her own loneliness, the need to keep something alive in this place of death. She left water within reach, though she doubted he'd wake before morning. The barn door she barred from the outside. If he did wake, she didn't want him wandering in delirium. Back in the house, she washed the blood from her hands, watching the red water swirl down the basin. Her dress was ruined, stained beyond saving. One more thing she couldn't afford to lose. Sleep wouldn't come. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. If he died, she'd have to bury him somewhere. If he lived, then what? She couldn't keep an Apache warrior hidden in her barn forever. When dawn finally broke, she checked on him immediately. He was awake, alert, watching the door as she entered. His fever had broken in the night. The blankets were soaked with sweat. "Water?" she asked, holding up the bucket. He nodded once. She helped him drink, supporting his head. This close, she could see the scars on his chest and arms, old wounds from other battles. Whatever else he was, this man was a survivor. She brought food, corn mush and a bit of salt pork. He ate slowly, watching her the whole time. When she reached to check his bandages, he caught her wrist again, gentler this time. "No," he said, the word clear despite his accent. "I need to check for infection," she said, miming looking at the wound. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released her wrist and lay back, permitting the examination. The wounds looked better. No red streaks of blood poisoning, no fresh bleeding. She changed the bandages, noting how he controlled his breathing through the pain. Days passed in this strange routine. She'd tend him morning and evening, bringing food, water, checking wounds. He never spoke beyond the occasional word. Yes, no, water. But he watched everything, those dark eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her nervous. On the fourth day, she found him sitting up, testing the splinted leg. Alarm shot through her. "You'll undo all my work," she scolded, pushing him back down. "That bone needs weeks to knit." He said something in Apache, tone clearly frustrated. Then, in halting English, "Must go, danger, for you." It was the most he'd spoken. She sat on the upturned crate she used as a chair. "Where would you go? You can't walk, can't ride." He gestured vaguely south. "My people." "How far?" He held up two hands, fingers spread. 20 miles, 20 days. She couldn't tell. "You leave now. You die," she said bluntly. "That leg gets infected, or you fall off a horse, or someone shoots you for an Apache raider. That what you want?" He turned away, jaw tight with more than physical pain. She could guess what it cost him. Accepting help from an enemy, because that's what they were. Wasn't it his people and hers had been killing each other for generations? "What's your name?" she asked softly. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Nalnish." At her blank look, he added, "One who works, makes things." "I'm Ellie," she pointed to herself. "Ellie Rollins." He repeated it carefully, the unfamiliar sounds awkward on his tongue. Ellie. It was a start. Whatever came next, at least they had names, in a world that seemed determined to strip everything away. Sometimes the small human things mattered most. Outside, thunder rumbled across the plateau. She looked up sharply. Rain. But the sky through the barn's gaps remained stubbornly clear. Another promise the desert wouldn't keep. She'd figure out tomorrow when it came. For now, she had a patient to tend, a ranch to run, and a secret to keep. It was enough. It had to be. The second week brought unexpected progress. Nalnish, though Ellie had taken to calling him Hawk in her mind, for the sharp way he watched everything, began fashioning a crutch from a sturdy branch she'd brought him. His hands worked with surprising skill, shaping the wood with just a knife, patting the top with strips of hide. "You're a craftsman," she observed, watching him work. He glanced up, a ghost of pride flickering across his features. "My father made bows, best in—" He searched for the word. Band, group. It was the most he'd volunteered about himself. She found herself hungry for more. These glimpses of the life he'd led before that bullet found him. By the 10th day, he was moving around the tack room, testing his weight on the crutch. The broken leg held, though she could see the pain it caused him. Apache or not, the man had an iron will. That evening, she found him standing by the small window, staring out at the failing corn. "No good," he said, shaking his head. "Ground, too." He made a gesture, fingers spread wide. "Open. Wind takes water." "Tell me something I don't know," she muttered. He turned to her, expression thoughtful. "You know 3 sisters." "I don't know anyone around here." A rare smile tugged at his mouth. "Not people. Plants, corn, beans, squash. Together they grow. Apart," he shrugged. She'd heard of companion planting, but never paid it much mind. Samuel had been set in his ways, farming like his father had back in Illinois. But Illinois wasn't the high desert. "Show me," she said. He looked skeptical. "I cannot walk fields." "Then draw it." She brought him charcoal and a smooth board. His drawings were simple but clear corn stalks with beans winding up them, squash spreading below to shade the soil. He sketched water channels, different from the straight rows Samuel had plowed. These curved with the land's natural contours. "Water runs here when rain comes," he explained, tracing the curves. "You catch it, guide it, not fight land, work with land." Over the following days, he shared more knowledge. Which wild plants held water in their roots, how to read the sky for weather changes, where to dig for certain clays that could line irrigation ditches. Information passed down through generations, bought with centuries of survival in this unforgiving landscape. Ellie absorbed it all, ashamed at how little she truly knew about the land she was trying to farm. She had been imposing Illinois on New Mexico, expecting it to yield. One afternoon, while changing his bandages, she noticed him tense at the sound of horses approaching. She peered through a crack in the barn wall. 2 riders, strangers. "Stay quiet," she whispered. She met them in the yard, rifle prominently displayed against the porch rail. They were drifters from the look of them, trail dust thick on their clothes. "Afternoon, ma'am," the older one said, touching his hat. "We're looking for work. Heard there might be ranches hiring in these parts." "Not here," she said curtly. "Try the Sequoia Ranch, 10 miles north." The younger one's eyes roamed over the property, taking in the struggling garden, the few cattle. "You here alone, ma'am?" The question sent ice down her spine. "My husband's out checking the fence line. He'll be back soon." They exchanged glances. The older one smiled, not pleasantly. "Funny. We heard in town the Rollins widow was running this place solo." Her hand inched toward the rifle. "You heard wrong. Now I'll ask you to move along." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the older drifter shrugged. "Our mistake. Come on, Jim." They rode off slowly, in no hurry. Ellie waited until they were out of sight. then sagged against the porch rail, heart hammering. When she returned to the barn, Hawk was standing, balanced on his crutch, the knife in his hand. "You heard?" He nodded grimly. "They come back." "Maybe not." "They come back," he repeated with certainty. "Saw you alone. Saw weakness." She wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. The encounter had stripped away any illusion of safety. A woman alone on an isolated ranch, she might as well hang a sign inviting trouble. "I have the rifle." "You sleep with rifle workfields with rifle." He shook his head. "Need more. Need." He searched for the word. "Deterrent." That night, she barely slept. Every sound had her reaching for the Winchester. When dawn came without incident, she was exhausted but relieved. Hawk was already awake, sitting up on his pallet. "I help," he announced. "You can barely walk." "I watch. You work. I tell you when someone comes." He held up a small mirror she hadn't noticed before. Must have had it on him when she found him. "Flashlight. You see, you know." It wasn't much of a warning system, but it was something. She helped him to a spot where he could see both the approach road and the fields, gave him the mirror and a blanket for shade. Working the corn, she found herself constantly checking for his signal, but as the hours passed, she began to see the land differently. His comments from the tack room came back. Work with the land, not against it. She started small, digging a curved channel where she'd seen water flow during the last rain. It was hard work, but when she stood back, she could see the sense of it. If rain came, the water would pool here instead of running off. That evening, Hawk examined her work with a critical eye. "Good start," he said finally. "Tomorrow, show you clay spot, line channel." She wanted to protest. He shouldn't be moving around so much. But the determination in his face stopped her. He needed to be useful. She realized. Needed purpose just as much as she needed help. They developed a routine. Morning, she'd help him to his watch post. He'd signal if anyone approached while she worked. Evenings, he'd teach her something new. How to read animal tracks. Which plants indicated water below. How to predict weather from cloud formations. She gave him Samuel's old clothes to replace his torn buckskins. The pants had to be cut to accommodate the splint, but the shirt fit well enough. Seeing him in her husband's clothes should have been disturbing. Instead, it felt like closing a circle somehow. 3 weeks after she'd found him, Hawk surprised her. She came to bring him dinner and found he'd made her something, a water carrier woven from yucca fibers, sealed with pine pitch. "For you," he said simply. She turned it over in her hands, marveling at the tight weave, the careful construction. "It's beautiful." He ducked his head, almost shy. "Is nothing. When leg heals, make better things." "When your leg heals, you'll leave." The words came out before she could stop them. His expression went carefully neutral. "Yes, must find my people." Of course. What had she expected, that he'd stay here, helping her farm? The thought was absurd, yet the prospect of facing this alone again made her chest tight. That night, the coyotes sounded closer, or maybe it was wolves. She lay awake, rifle beside the bed, thinking about the drifters, about Jedediah Moore, about all the ways a woman alone could come to grief out here. In the morning, she found Hawk had dragged himself to the barn door, watching the sunrise. His face was drawn with pain from the effort. "You'll hurt yourself," she scolded, helping him back to the pallet. "Need to be stronger," he said through gritted teeth. "You need protection. I am—" He made a gesture of disgust. "Useless. Broken. You're healing, and you've helped more than you know." He looked at her with those intense dark eyes. "Why you save me?" She'd asked herself the same question dozens of times. "I don't know. Maybe because I was tired of watching things die." "Your people kill mine. My people kill yours. Should have left me." "Probably." She rewrapped his leg, noting the swelling had gone down. "But I didn't—" And you're helping me when you could have cut my throat the first night you could hold a knife. Apache don't kill women who show mercy, he said stiffly. And farmers' wives don't usually harbor Apache warriors. Guess we're both breaking rules. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. They were both outcasts in their way, both clinging to survival in a hostile world. The next morning brought clouds building over the mountains. Hawk studied them intently. "Rain coming," he announced. "Maybe 3 days. We've had clouds before. They never amount to anything. This different. Smell the wind." She did, and caught something, a freshness, a hint of moisture. Hope stirred in her chest. "If rain comes, you must work fast," he said. "Channel not finished. Water will run off, be wasted." She spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation, following his directions. Dig here, build up earth there, create basins around the corn, line what channels she could with the clay he'd located, though her back screamed from hauling it. On the 3rd day, the rain came. The rain fell in sheets, turning the hard-packed earth to mud within minutes. Ellie stood in the doorway, watching her crude channels fill with rushing water, directing it toward the cornfields just as Hawk had predicted. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. "It's working," she called to him, giddy with excitement. He nodded from his seat by the window, a slight smile playing at his lips. Earth remembers water. Just need to remind it where to go. The storm lasted through the night. She barely slept, checking repeatedly that the channels held. By morning, the rain had tapered to a drizzle, but the collection basins were full. The corn, which had been dying, seemed to stand a little straighter. Over the following weeks, Hawk's leg continued to heal. He'd graduated from the crutch to a walking stick, though he still couldn't put full weight on the injured leg. More importantly, he'd become her teacher in the art of desert survival. "See this," he pointed to a scraggly plant she'd always ignored. "Roots go deep, dig here when well runs low." He taught her to read the landscape like a book, where ancient streams had run, where water collected underground, which slopes would channel rain, under his guidance. She began transforming the farm's layout, working with the natural contours instead of against them. One morning, she found him weaving something from strips of willow bark. "What's that?" "Basket, for gathering." He worked without looking up. "You waste time with many trips. This carry more." She watched his fingers work, swift and sure despite the months of injury. "Where did you learn all this?" "Grandmother, mother, all women in my—" He paused, searching for words. "Clan. But men learn too. Everything useful when you move with seasons. Do you miss it, your people?" His hand stilled. "Every day." Then, softer. "But they think me dead. Better that way." "Why?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally, I was scout, led warriors to raid ranch. But rancher had many guns waiting. Trap." His jaw tightened. "My fault. 3 died. I should die too, but—" He gestured to his leg. "Ran like coward. Fell in canyon. Surviving isn't cowardice. For Apache warrior, yes." His voice was bitter. "Better to die with honor than live with shame." She understood that feeling too well. The shame of failing, of not being strong enough to hold things together. They sat in companionable silence, 2 people marked by loss. As summer wore on, the transformation of the ranch became visible. The corn grew taller, the beans climbed, the squash spread its broad leaves. She'd lost most of the original planting, but the new crops, planted according to Hawk's instructions, thrived. He'd also taught her to find food in the desert itself, which cacti were edible, where to dig for roots, how to trap rabbits without wasting ammunition. She grew leaner but stronger, her hands calloused in new places, her eyes sharper. One scorching afternoon, while she worked on extending an irrigation channel, his mirror flashed urgently. She looked up to see riders approaching, not on the road, but cutting across the desert. Her blood ran cold. The drifters from weeks ago. She made it to the house just as they entered the yard. This time, they didn't bother with pretense. "Afternoon. Widow Rollins," the older one said, dismounting without invitation. "Thought we'd pay another visit. See if you've reconsidered your hospitality." "Get off my land." She held the rifle steady, but they both knew the mathematics. 2 of them. 1 of her. Now, that's unfriendly. The younger one circled to her left, forcing her to divide her attention. "We've been watching. You're all alone out here. Must get lonely." "I said leave. Or what you'll shoot us both." The older drifter took a step closer. "You might get one of us, but the other," he smiled, ugly and confident. A movement behind them caught her eye. Hawk, moving silent as his namesake despite the injured leg, had emerged from the barn. He held one of her kitchen knives. The younger drifter must have seen her eyes flick away. He started to turn. "What?" Hawk moved faster than she'd thought possible. The knife flew from his hand, burying itself in the younger man's shoulder. The drifter screamed, spinning and falling. The older one went for his gun, but Ellie was ready. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The bullet caught him in the thigh, dropping him to the dirt. For a moment, everything was still except for the moaning of the wounded men. Then Hawk limped forward, retrieving the knife with clinical efficiency. "Can ride?" he asked the men coldly. They nodded frantically, clutching their wounds. "Then go. Tell others. This place protected. Come back. You feed coyotes." They helped each other onto their horses, the older one leaving a trail of blood. As they rode off, Hawk called after them in Apache. Ellie didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, a promise of worse if they returned. When they were gone, she found herself shaking. The rifle slipped from her hands. "You did well," Hawk said quietly. "Steady, brave. I shot a man. You protected home. No shame in that." She looked at him, this man she'd saved, who just saved her in return. "Thank you." He shrugged, but she caught the wince. The quick movement had cost him. She helped him back to the barn, checking his leg. The splint held, but fresh swelling was visible. "You shouldn't have risked it," she scolded. "Could not watch them hurt you?" His voice was matter-of-fact. "You gave me life. I protect yours. How do you say, debt?" "No." She met his eyes. "Not a debt, a choice. We protect each other because we choose to. That's what partners do." Something shifted in his expression. "Partners. Unless you have a better word for whatever this is." She gestured between them. He considered this. "In my language, we say those who stand together. But partners." He tested the word. "Yes, partners." That night, she moved his pallet into the house. The pretense of hiding him seemed pointless now. Word would spread about the Apache who'd defended the Rollins ranch. Either it would bring more trouble or it would warn others off. Time would tell. They ate dinner together for the first time, sharing the simple meal of beans and cornbread at her kitchen table. It felt strange, but right, like pieces of different puzzles somehow fitting together. "Those men," she said eventually. "They'll talk. Everyone will know you're here." "Yes." "You could leave. Your leg's strong enough to ride now." He pushed the beans around his plate. "Could leave, but channel's not finished. Fall planting not done. And you still can't track rabbit worth damn." Despite everything, she smiled. "Is that so? Maybe stay until you learn proper, then," he shrugged. Neither of them mentioned that, then kept moving further into the future. The corn was growing, but there was always something else to teach, to learn, to build. The partnership that had begun in desperation was becoming something neither had expected. Outside, lightning flickered over the mountains, promising more rain. Ellie had learned to read the signs now, to see the patterns Hawk pointed out. The land was teaching them both, about survival, about adaptation, about finding strength in the most unlikely alliances. "Tomorrow," Hawk said, "I show you where to dig new well. Old one in wrong place." "How do you know?" He tapped his chest. "Feel it here. Water calls to water." 6 months ago, she would have dismissed such talk as superstition. Now she just nodded. The desert had its own logic, its own language, and with Hawk as her translator, she was finally beginning to understand. The lamp flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Two people from different worlds, brought together by violence and held together by something neither quite dared name. But naming could wait. For now, there was work to do, knowledge to share, and a ranch to save. Together, word of the Apache at the Rollins Ranch spread faster than wildfire. Within days, Ellie noticed riders slowing on the main road, staring at her property before moving on. Some were curious, others, she suspected, were Moore's men, reporting back to their boss. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning. Ellie was checking the corn when she heard horses, many horses. Hawk's mirror flashed urgently from his position near the house. She counted 8 riders approaching, Jedediah Moore at their head. She met them in the yard, rifle in hand. Hawk stayed on the porch, visible but not threatening, his presence a clear message. "Mrs. Rollins." Moore's voice was silk over steel. "I heard you've taken in a boarder." "What I do on my land is my business." "Not when you're harboring a savage." His pale eyes fixed on Hawk. "Do you know what these animals do to white women, to children?" "I know what men like you do," Ellie shot back. "At least he's never tried to steal my water." Moore's face darkened. "What are you talking about?" "The creek that mysteriously dried up after my husband died. Funny how water stops flowing uphill." "You're talking nonsense. Woman, grief has addled your mind." Jake Cotter shifted in his saddle. "Want us to remove the Indian, boss?" Moore held up a hand, studying Ellie with those snake eyes. "No need for unpleasantness. I'm here to renew my offer. $400 for your land. Enough to pay your debts and start fresh somewhere civilized." "My answer hasn't changed." "It might when the bank forecloses next month. They won't be as generous as I am." He leaned forward in his saddle. "And they certainly won't let you keep your pet savage around." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. This territory has laws about harboring hostiles. Sheriff Whelan might overlook a lot, but not this." His smile was cold. "Take my offer, Mrs. Rollins, before things get complicated." They rode off in a cloud of dust, but the threat lingered like smoke. Ellie found her hands trembling as she lowered the rifle. "He's right," Hawk said quietly from the porch. "I bring danger to you." "You bring help," she corrected firmly. "Without you, I'd have lost this place already." "With me, you might lose more than land." She climbed the porch steps to face him. "Let me worry about that. Right now, we need to find out what Moore's hiding upstream." Hawk frowned. "Too dangerous. His land, his men. Then we go at night." He studied her face, saw the determination there. "You sure?" "The creek didn't dry up naturally. You said so yourself. Water doesn't just disappear. If Moore's damming it illegally..." She trailed off, mind racing. "Still need proof," Hawk pointed out. "Then we'll get it." They waited until the new moon, when darkness would be deepest. Hawk's leg had healed enough for distance, though he still limped. They rode double on Samuel's mare, moving through the desert like ghosts. Hawk knew paths she'd never seen, ancient trails that skirted the main roads. They dismounted a mile from where the creek entered Moore's land, continuing on foot. "Stay low," he whispered. "Move when wind moves brush." Following his lead, she felt clumsy as a cow, but they made progress. The sound of water reached them first, the creek that should have been flowing through her land. In the moonlight, They sawed a crude but effective dam, diverting the entire stream into a new channel that fed Moore's vast holdings. Worse, she could see where they'd blasted rock to change the creek's natural course. "The bastard," she breathed. Hawk touched her arm, pointing. A guard sat near the dam, rifle across his knees, head nodding with near sleep. They retreated as carefully as they'd come, once safe. Ellie's anger boiled over. "He's stealing water from everyone downstream. Not just me, the Hendricks place, the Mexican families near the border. They're all suffering." "Knowing and proving are different things," Hawk reminded her. "Then we need witnesses, documentation." Her mind raced. "The territorial water rights are filed in town. If I can show the natural watercourse has been altered." "Moore owns half the town. Not Judge Harriman. He's federal, appointed from Washington, and he's a stickler for law." They made it back before dawn, exhausted but energized by purpose. Over the next days, Ellie made careful preparations. She'd need surveys, testimony, evidence that would stand in court. "I'll have to go to town," she said. "File a formal complaint." "Moore expects this. We'll be ready." "Then we'll have to be smarter." She wrote letters to every downstream rancher affected by the water theft. Most were too frightened of Moore to respond, but a few, the desperate ones, agreed to support her claim. The Mexican families were more willing to talk. They'd been in the valley for generations, knew every stream and spring. Their testimony about the creek's historic flow would be crucial. Hawk, meanwhile, worked on the ranch. He'd taken to wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, making his heritage less obvious from a distance. The corn was thriving under his care, and he'd started planning for fall planting. One evening, as they reviewed the water rights documents Samuel had saved, Hawk asked, "Why does paper matter so much to your people?" "Because it's supposed to be stronger than guns." Ellie replied, "The law, written down, protects everyone equally." He made a skeptical sound. "Words on paper didn't protect my people." She couldn't argue with that, but it was the only weapon she had against Moore's money and influence. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Maria Gonzalez, whose family farmed near the border, arrived with her elderly father. "Senora Rawlins," Maria said. "My father. He has something you need to see." The old man produced a leather-wrapped bundle. Inside were hand-drawn maps, yellowed with age, showing the valley's water systems from 50 years ago. "My grandfather made these," he said in Spanish, Maria translating. "When the Spanish still held these lands, see the creek. It has always flowed this way, until now." It was exactly the evidence she needed. Historical proof that Moore had altered the watercourse. Ellie could have hugged them both. "Will you testify to this?" she asked. The old man nodded gravely. "Water is life. Those who steal it steal from God." As the Gonzalez family left, Hawk watched from the window. "Brave people. Moore will make them pay." "Then we'd better make sure Moore is too busy with legal troubles to bother them." She spent days preparing her case, writing and rewriting the formal complaint. Hawk helped more than she'd expected. His memory for terrain details was photographic, and he could describe exactly how the water diversion worked. "You'd make a good lawyer," she told him one evening. He snorted. "Apache lawyer. That would confuse your courts." "Things change. Maybe not fast enough, but they change." He gave her a long look. "Some things, others." He gestured between them. "This confuses me too." She knew what he meant. The partnership that had grown between them, the comfortable rhythms they'd developed, the way they could work in companionable silence for hours. It was more than survival now, more than mutual benefit. "Does it have to make sense?" she asked softly. "To my people, yes. To yours, yes. But to us," he shrugged. Maybe different answer. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Hawk stood abruptly. "Tomorrow. Check north fence. Cattle getting through again." She accepted the change of subject. Some things were too fragile to examine too closely, like desert flowers that bloomed briefly in hidden places. The next day, she rode to town to file the complaint. The clerk's eyes widened when he read it. "You're accusing Jedediah Moore of water theft." "I'm accusing him of violating territorial water law," she corrected. "Same thing, ma'am. You sure you want to do this?" "Just file it." Word spread fast. By the time she left the courthouse, people were staring, some with respect, others with pity. Everyone knew what happened to those who crossed Jedediah Moore. But the die was cast. Legal machinery, once started, was hard to stop. Judge Harriman would have to investigate. The truth would come out. As she rode home, Ellie felt the weight of what she'd started. But looking at her thriving fields, the corn tall and green where before there'd been only dust, she knew she'd made the right choice. Hawk was waiting on the porch, his dark eyes readable now after all these months. Worried, proud, determined. "It's done," she said simply. He nodded. "Then we prepare for war." The surveyor arrived 3 days later, a thin, nervous man named Edmund Carver who kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting ambush. Judge Harriman had appointed him to map the creek's natural course and document any alterations. "Mrs. Rollins," Carver said, mopping his brow despite the morning cool. "I hope you understand the position this puts me in. Mr. Moore is influential." "Mr. Moore is a thief," Ellie said flatly. "Your job is to record the truth." Hawk emerged from the barn, and Carver took an involuntary step back. Is he... "This is Hawk. He knows every stream and spring for 50 miles. He'll guide us." Carver swallowed hard, but nodded. They set out at dawn. Following the dry creek bed upstream, Hawk moved ahead, reading signs invisible to the others, old watermarks on rocks, the types of plants that grew where water once flowed. "Here," he said, pointing to a section where the bank had been recently disturbed. "Earth different, moved by men, not water." Carver made careful notes, sketching the terrain. As they neared Moore's property line, Hawk held up a hand. "Guards," he whispered. Sure enough, 2 riders were patrolling the fence line. They hadn't been there before. "We'll have to go around," Ellie said. "No," Hawk studied the terrain. "I know another way. Old path." He led them through a narrow canyon that seemed impassable until he showed them the handholds carved into rock-ancient steps his people had used for generations. Carver struggled but managed, driven by professional pride and perhaps a growing indignation at what they were uncovering. From the canyon rim, they had a clear view of Moore's Dam. In daylight, the scope of the theft was staggering. Not just a simple diversion, Moore had blasted through solid rock, permanently altering the watershed. "Good Lord," Carver breathed. This must have taken months. Explosives, work crews. "And nobody said anything," Ellie added bitterly. Carver's pencil flew across his notebook. "The natural channel is clear. This alteration violates every principle of prior appropriation. Downstream users have primary rights." They spent hours documenting everything. Hawk showed Carver subtle signs, erosion patterns, vegetation changes that prove the creek's historic path. The surveyor's initial nervousness gave way to professional outrage. "In 20 years of surveying, I've never seen such blatant disregard for water law," he declared. As they prepared to leave, a shot rang out. Rock chips flew inches from Carver's head. "Move," Hawk commanded, pushing them behind a boulder. More shots followed. Ellie caught a glimpse of riders approaching fast. "Can't go back the way we came," she said. Hawk was already moving. "This way, quick!" He led them along the canyon rim, using every scrap of cover. Carver stumbled, papers scattering. Ellie grabbed what she could, stuffing them inside her shirt. They half ran, half slid down a treacherous slope. Behind them, men shouted. Another shot whined overhead. The horses, Ellie gasped. No time. On foot better here. Hawk pulled them into a maze of wind-carved rock. Know these stones, they don't. For an hour, they played deadly hide-and-seek. Hawk's knowledge of the terrain was all that saved them. Finally, as the sun peaked, he led them to a hidden spring surrounded by thick brush. Rest, he said. They gave up. Carver collapsed, shaking. They tried to kill us, over water rights. Over money, Ellie corrected. That dam turns desert into gold for more. Well, he won't profit from it much longer. Carver clutched his notebook like a weapon. This evidence will bury him in court. They made it back to the ranch after dark, exhausted and footsore. Ellie insisted Carver stay the night. Sending him to town alone seemed dangerous. Over dinner, the surveyor studied Hawk with open curiosity. I've never actually talked with an Apache before. Hawk's expression was neutral. Now you have... May I ask, how did you come to be here? Ellie tensed, but Hawk answered calmly. Mrs. Rollins saved my life. Now I help save her land. Simple as that. Simple as that. Carver left at first light, promising to file his report immediately. Ellie watched him go with mixed feelings, relief that the evidence was documented, fear of Moore's retaliation. She didn't have long to wait. That afternoon, Sheriff Whelan arrived with 2 deputies. The sheriff was a decent man, but weak, too indebted to Moore to stand against him. Mrs. Rollins, he said, hat in hand. I've got a complaint here, says you're harboring a hostile Indian. I need to investigate. He's no more hostile than you are. Sheriff? Maybe so, but the law's clear. No Apache can reside on private property without government permission. Since when? Ellie demanded. Since the territory passed the Residence Act last year. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but he'll have to come with us. Hawk stepped onto the porch. I go, no trouble for her. No, Ellie moved between them. This is Moore's doing. You know it is. Sheriff. What I know don't matter. Law's the law. Like water law, she shot back. Where were you when Moore was blasting through solid rock to steal a whole creek? Whelan flushed. That's a matter for the courts. And this is a matter of common decency. But she saw it was useless. The sheriff had his orders. Hawk touched her shoulder gently. Is okay. I go. They'll send you to the reservation. Or worse. He met her eyes, and she saw no fear there. Then you fight alone. You're strong enough now. The words hit her like a physical blow. Was she these months? She'd grown to depend on his quiet presence, his knowledge, his partnership, the thought of facing Moore alone. Wait, she said. Sheriff, what if he's my employee? The Hendricks have Mexican workers. The Steinmans have those Chinese men for the railroad work. That's different. They got papers, work permits. Then I'll get papers. Give me a week. Whelan shook his head. Can't do it, Mr. Moore. I mean, the complaint demands immediate action. They put Hawk in shackles. The sight of it, this proud man chained like an animal, made Ellie's vision blur with rage. I'll get you out, she promised as they led him to the wagon. He managed a small smile. Watch the corn, almost ready for harvest. As the sheriff's wagon disappeared, Ellie stood alone in her yard, fists clenched. Moore had made his move, thinking her helpless without her protector. He was about to learn otherwise. She saddled Samuel's mare and rode hard for town, heading straight for Judge Harriman's office. His secretary tried to stop her, but she pushed past. Judge, I need 5 minutes. Harriman, a stern man with silver whiskers, looked up from Carver's report. Mrs. Rollins, I was just reading about your situation. Shocking business with the water. That's not why I'm here. She quickly explained about Hawk, the arrest, Moore's transparent manipulation of the law. The judge frowned. The Residence Act is unfortunately clear. Then give him a work permit. Make him legal. I don't have that authority. That's Federal Department of Indian Affairs. How long would that take? Months. Maybe years. Ellie's heart sank. He doesn't have months. You know what happens to Apache men in custody. Harriman was quiet for a moment. Then, there might be another way. The Act has exceptions for Indians who provide essential services. Military scouts, for instance. Hawk's essential to my ranch. Carver can testify how his knowledge helped document the water theft. That's not quite what the law intended. The judge drummed his fingers. But, Mr. Moore's manipulation of the law rather opens the door to creative interpretation, doesn't it? Hope sparked. Then you'll help? I'll write a temporary order classifying him as an agricultural consultant, vital to resolving the water rights dispute. It won't hold forever, but it might buy time. Ellie could have kissed the old man. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Moore won't take this quietly. You've challenged him legally, publicly. Men like him don't forgive that. She thought of Hawk in chains, of her dying corn before he came, of Samuel's grave on the hillside. Neither do women like me. The judge actually smiled. No, I suppose they don't. Give me an hour to draft the order. Ellie used the time to send telegrams to the territorial governor, to newspaper editors, to anyone who might take interest in a widow's fight against a land baron. If Moore wanted to make this public, she'd oblige him. When she returned to the jail with Harriman's order, the sheriff read it 3 times, looking for an excuse to refuse. This is highly irregular, he muttered. So is stealing water and bribing officials. Ellie replied sweetly. Shall we discuss irregularities in front of the judge? Whelan gave in with poor grace. When they brought Hawk out, she saw they'd roughed him up. A split lip, bruised cheek, but he walked steady, dignity intact. Outside, she helped him onto her horse. I'm sorry, this is my fault. No, it's Moore's fault, and now he shows his fear. Fear. Why else attack so hard he knows you can win? As they rode home together, Ellie felt something shift inside her. The fear that had driven her for months was transforming into something harder, more focused. Moore had overplayed his hand. The water evidence was documented. Hawk was legally protected. For now. The real fight was just beginning. The old well had been dry for 2 months, forcing Ellie to haul water from the backup well near the barn, a laborious process that took hours each day. She'd mentioned it to Hawk that morning, and now he stood in the yard, studying the landscape with that peculiar intensity she'd come to recognize. Wrong place, he said finally, gesturing at the well. Man who dug this, he thought like farmer, straight down, hope for best. Samuel hired a well digger from town, said this was the most likely spot. Hawk shook his head. Your husband's man didn't listen to the land. He walked slowly across the yard, occasionally kneeling to touch the earth, examine a rock, or study the sparse vegetation near the eastern edge of the property, where the land sloped up toward a rocky ridge. He stopped. Here, he said with certainty. Ellie joined him, skeptical. Here it's higher ground. Water flows down, not up. On surface, yes, but below. He picked up a handful of soil, crumbled it between his fingers. Feel this. She copied his action. The earth felt different, cooler, with a faint moisture that shouldn't exist in this drought. Underground river runs here, Hawk explained. Very old, from mountains, through rock, deep but strong. My grandfather found 3 such rivers, saved our band many times. How can you know that? He pointed to a scraggly juniper growing nearby. This tree tells me roots go very deep, and here he indicated a particular type of grass, barely visible. This grows only where water lives below. Even if you're right, we can't dig that deep, not without proper equipment. Not straight down. Follow the rock. He traced a line with his finger. Water trapped between stone layers, maybe 30 feet, not 100. Ellie considered. They desperately needed reliable water, especially with the creek still diverted. But digging a well was back-breaking work, and if they guessed wrong, "I'll think about it," she said. That night, she found herself studying Samuel's old journals. He'd tried so hard to make this land yield, but always by forcing it, never by listening. Maybe that had been their mistake from the start. The next morning, she made her decision. "We dig where you said." Hawk nodded, unsurprised. "Need tools and help." "I can't afford to hire anyone." "Not hire trade," he thought for a moment. "The Mexican families. They need water too. We share well, they share work." It was a practical solution. Ellie rode to the Gonzalez homestead that afternoon. Maria's father, Don Roberto, listened thoughtfully to her proposal. "My Apache friend believes there's water where we want to dig." Ellie explained, "If your sons help us dig, you can water your flocks here when needed." Don Roberto's weathered face creased in consideration. Apache water finder. They have the gift. He spoke rapidly in Spanish to his sons, then nodded. "We help, but if Senor Moore makes trouble..." "Moore's got bigger problems right now," Ellie assured him. The digging began 3 days later. Hawk directed the work with quiet authority. His leg, though healed, couldn't take the strain of digging, but his knowledge was invaluable. He showed them how to follow the rock seams, when to angle the shaft, where to shore up the walls. The Gonzalez brothers, Miguel, Carlos, and young Pedro worked in shifts with Ellie. The earth was hard, full of stones that had to be hauled up bucket by bucket. Progress was measured in feet, sometimes only inches per day. After a week, they'd gone 15 feet with no sign of water. The Gonzalez brothers began to mutter doubts. "Maybe the Apache is wrong," Carlos suggested during a water break. Hawk, who'd been examining the latest bucket of earth, looked up sharply. "Today," he said simply. "Water comes today." Ellie saw the certainty in his eyes. "Keep digging," she told the brothers. 3 hours later, Miguel's pick struck something different. Not the ring of rock or the thud of earth, but a hollow sound. He struck again, and the bottom of the shaft suddenly darkened with moisture. "Agua," Pedro shouted. "Water!" They worked frantically to widen the seepage. Within an hour, clear water was pooling at the bottom, rising slowly but steadily. Don Roberto, summoned by his excited sons, peered down the shaft in amazement. 40 years I live in this valley. Never would I have looked for water here." "The Apache knew," Miguel said, with new respect in his voice. They spent the next days finishing the well properly, lining it with stones, installing a windlass, building a protective wall around the opening. The water rose to within 10 feet of the surface and stayed there, clear and cold and constant. "It's beautiful," Ellie breathed, hauling up the first official bucket. The water tasted of deep places, minerals and time. That evening, the Gonzalez family stayed for a celebration dinner. Ellie killed one of her precious chickens for the occasion. As they ate, Don Roberto raised his cup of well water in a toast. "To partnership," he said, looking at both Ellie and Hawk, "and to those who see what others miss." After the guests left, Ellie found Hawk standing by the new well, gazing down into its depths. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "This water, it changes everything. Your crops, stronger, livestock, healthier. Moore sees this, he gets angrier. Let him. We have witnesses now. The Gonzalez family saw you find this water. They'll tell others. Your knowledge, your contributions, it all builds the case for keeping you here legally." He turned to her. "You think like War Chief now? Each move, many purposes." "I learned from a good teacher." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the faint sound of water far below. The desert evening was painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Your husband," Hawk said suddenly, "he never asked the land what it wanted." "No," Ellie agreed softly. "He told it what he wanted it to be." "You're different," You learn to listen. Because you taught me to hear. He made a dismissive gesture. Land was always speaking. You just needed... He searched for words. Different ears. Is that why you stayed to teach me different ears? The question hung between them, loaded with all the things they hadn't said these past months. Hawk was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. First, stayed because too weak to go. Then, stayed because you needed help. Now. He paused, choosing words carefully. Now. Stay because this feels like place I should be. Even though it's dangerous, even though my people and yours. My people gone. Your people want you gone. Maybe that makes us same people now. People who don't fit but refuse to leave. Ellie felt tears prick her eyes. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's truth. He looked back at the well. Tomorrow, we start irrigation channels from here, small ones first. Make garden near house. Save walking, then bigger channels for fields. She recognized the deflection but accepted it gratefully. Some truths were better approached slowly, like wild horses that spooked at sudden movements. That night, she lay awake thinking about water and belonging, about the strange paths that led people to each other. Outside, a mockingbird sang moon songs. And from somewhere in the darkness came the sound of their new well's windlass creaking gently in the breeze. The next morning brought riders, not Moore's men, but a delegation from town. 3 members of the Territorial Water Commission, come to inspect the illegal dam based on Carver's report. Mrs. Rollins, the lead commissioner, a stern man named Josiah Blackwood, tipped his hat. We'll need access through your land to reach the creek. Of course. She glanced at Hawk, who was already moving to saddle horses. Is it true what they're saying in town? Blackwood asked. That an Apache found you new water? It's true. The commissioners exchanged glances. Interesting times, Blackwood murmured. Very interesting indeed. As they prepared to ride out, Ellie felt a surge of hope. The well was producing abundantly. Official investigators were finally looking into Moore's theft. The tide was turning. But tides, as Hawk had taught her, could flow both ways, and Moore hadn't built his empire by accepting defeat gracefully. The real test was coming. She could feel it gathering like the thunderclouds that built over the mountains, dark, powerful, and inevitable. But now she had water, and that changed everything. In the desert, after all, water was power, and for the first time since Samuel died, Ellie Rollins felt powerful. The sound came just after midnight, a low rumble like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. Ellie sat bolt upright, instantly alert. Beside her bed, Hawk was already standing, having moved his bedroll inside after the latest threats. Cattle, he said grimly. Many cattle. Moving fast. They rushed outside. In the starlight, a dark mass was pouring down from the north hills, hundreds of longhorns in full stampede, heading straight for the ranch. The well, Ellie gasped. The new well lay directly in their path. If the cattle hit it. And house, Hawk added. Get rifle. I handle this. You can't turn a stampede alone. But he was already moving. Grabbing a torch from beside the door. Not turn, redirect, old trick. He lit the torch and ran, his limp barely noticeable now, toward the east side of the property. Ellie grabbed the rifle and followed, her heart pounding with the approaching thunder of hooves. Hawk thrust the torch into a pile of tumbleweeds they'd cleared earlier. Then another, creating a line of fire. The dry brush caught immediately, flames leaping high. More! He shouted. Make wall of light. Understanding dawned. Ellie dropped the rifle and grabbed another torch, lighting brush piles along the eastern edge. The flames wouldn't stop the cattle, but the sudden barrier of light and heat might turn them. The ground shook. In the firelight, she could see the led steers, eyes rolling white with panic, horns glinting. They were maybe 200 yards away. Hawk was waving his torch. yelling in Apache harsh, guttural sounds that carried over the thunder. He looked wild in the dancing light, primal, like something out of the old stories. 100 yards, 50. The lead steers saw the firewall and tried to turn, but the mass behind pushed them forward. For a terrifying moment, Ellie thought they would crash through anyway. Then the herd's momentum shifted, like a river hitting a dam. They flowed sideways, following the line of fires away from the house, and, well, the earth trembled as hundreds of cattle thundered past. So close she could smell their panic, see the foam on their sides. Something else caught her eye. Riders, following the herd, trying to keep them moving toward the ranch. In the firelight, she recognized Jake Cotter and several of Moore's men. She grabbed the rifle, but Hawk caught her arm. "Let them go! Evidence better than bodies!" He was right. In their panic to escape the turned stampede, Cotter and his men were leaving clear tracks, and one had dropped something that gleamed in the firelight, a spur with a distinctive silver work. The stampede passed, the thunder fading as the cattle scattered into the desert. Ellie's legs gave out, and she sat hard on the ground, shaking. "You did well," Hawk said, crouching beside her. "Brave, smart. They tried to destroy everything, the house, the well, us, but failed. And now everyone will know Moore did this." Dawn revealed the full scope of the near disaster. The cattle had carved a swath of destruction 50 yards wide, but thanks to Hawk's quick thinking, they'd missed all the crucial structures. The tracks told a clear story, how the herd had been deliberately driven, where the riders had pushed them. By noon, Sheriff Whelan arrived with a posse, drawn by reports of the fire. "Stampede," Ellie said shortly, showing him the tracks. "Deliberately caused. There's one of Moore's spurs." Whelan picked up the silver spur, his face troubled. "Could have been stolen. Could have been dropped any time." "You know better, Sheriff." He sighed heavily. "What I know and what I can prove are different things, Mrs. Rollins." Then added to the water investigation, pattern of harassment. "Now hold on." "No, you hold on." Ellie's temper, held in check too long, finally snapped. Moore's stolen water, sent gunmen, had Hawk arrested on false pretenses. And now this. How many laws does he have to break before you do your job? Whelan flushed. "I uphold the law. You uphold Moore's payments." She stepped closer. "Everyone knows it. But what happens when the federal investigation finishes? When Judge Harriman rules you think Moore will protect you when he falls?" The sheriff left without another word, but Ellie saw the uncertainty in his eyes. "Good. Let him worry." That afternoon brought unexpected visitors, a dozen ranchers from downstream, led by Tom Hendricks. "Mrs. Rollins," Hendricks said, hat in hand. "We heard about last night and about your well finding Apache." She tensed, but Hendricks continued. "We also heard what the water commissioners found at Moore's dam. That water he stole, it wasn't just from you." "I know. We should have spoken up sooner. Should have backed you." He looked ashamed. "But we were scared. Moore holds paper on half our places." "What's changed?" "You have—" It was Ellen Steinman who spoke, one of the few other women trying to ranch alone. "You stood up to him, survived everything he threw at you, even found new water when he stole the old." "We want to join your water cooperative," Hendricks added. "Share the costs of drilling more wells, building proper irrigation. Together, we might survive. Apart," he shrugged eloquently. Ellie glanced at Hawk, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "There are conditions," she said. "First, Hawk is part of this. His knowledge is why we have water. Anyone who can't accept that can leave now." Nobody moved. "Second, we include the Mexican families. They've been here longest, know the land best." Hendricks hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." "Third, we document everything, every agreement, every shared cost, every gallon of water, legal and proper. so Moore can't challenge it. Agreed. They spent the afternoon planning. Hawk, after initial wariness, began sharing his knowledge, where other underground streams might run, how to build check dams to catch flash floodwater, traditional techniques his people had used for generations. "You're Apache," Ellen Steinman said quietly to Ellie. "He's not what I expected." "His name is Hawk, and no, he's not what anyone expects." That evening, as their visitors prepared to leave, Tom Hendricks pulled Ellie aside. "Moore's not going to take this quietly. He's got a lot to lose if that dam comes down." "I know. We'll stand with you, but it could get ugly." "It's already ugly, Tom, but now we've got allies." After everyone left, Ellie found Hawk sitting by the new well, carving something from a piece of juniper wood. "What are you making?" He held up the partially completed figure, a bird with spread wings. "Hawk, for you." "Why?" "Today you flew, faced danger, brought people together, like Hawk who circles high, sees everything, protects territory." He handed her the carving. "You're not same woman who found me in Canyon." "No," she agreed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I'm not." "Is good change." They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged. The ranch felt different now, no longer an isolated outpost, but part of something larger, a community bound by water and mutual need. "Moore will strike back," Hawk said eventually. "I know, but we'll be ready." Together. Together. The word hung between them, heavy with promise. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had everything else, as partners, as survivors, as two people who had found strength in the most unlikely alliance. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert. But tonight, their cries didn't sound lonely. They sounded like communication, connection, creatures making their way in a harsh world by not being alone. "Just like her, just like them." The wooden hawk was warm in her hands, carved with patience and skill, and something that might have been love. She closed her fingers around it and made a silent vow. Moore had tried to break her with stampeding cattle. He'd failed. She wouldn't fail either, not with water flowing beneath their feet and allies at their backs. Not with Hawk beside her, teaching her to see with different eyes. The war for the valley's water was entering its final phase, and Ellie Rollins, widow turned warrior, was ready for battle. The courthouse in Cedar Springs had never seen such a crowd. Ranchers, farmers, townspeople, and curious observers packed the courtroom for the water rights hearing. Judge Harriman sat behind his bench, stern as granite, while Jedediah Moore occupied the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers from Santa Fe. Ellie sat at the defendant's table with Thomas Whitfield, the only lawyer in town willing to take her case. Hawk sat directly behind her, his presence causing whispers throughout the room. "This hearing will determine the validity of water rights claims along Cedar Creek," Judge Harriman announced. "We'll examine evidence of illegal diversion and establish rightful usage based on prior appropriation." Moore's lead lawyer, a slick man named Cornelius Ashford, stood first. "Your Honor, my client has developed his land according to territorial law. Any modifications to natural waterways were done to maximize beneficial use." "By stealing from everyone downstream," Ellie muttered. "Mrs. Rollins, you'll have your turn," the judge warned. Ashford continued smoothly, presenting documents, surveys, and testimonies that painted Moore as a visionary developer bringing prosperity to the desert. It was well-rehearsed theater, and Ellie felt her heart sinking. Then Whitfield stood. "Your Honor, we'll demonstrate that Mr. Moore deliberately and illegally diverted an entire creek, depriving dozens of families of their historic water rights." He called Edmund Carver first, the surveyor, despite visible nervousness, presented his findings clearly. Maps showed the creek's natural course. Photographs revealed the blasted rock, the artificial channel. "The alteration is extensive and deliberate," Carver testified. "It would have taken months of work, explosives, and significant expense. Ashford cross-examined aggressively. Mr. Carver, isn't it true, Mrs. Rollins was present during your survey that she influenced your findings? She showed me where to look, yes, but the evidence speaks for itself. Next came Don Roberto Gonzalez, speaking through an interpreter. His family's maps from Spanish colonial times clearly showed the creek's historic flow. For 5 generations, my family has farmed using this water, he testified. Always it flowed here, until Senor Moore changed it. Moore's lawyers tried to discredit the old maps, questioning their authenticity. But Don Roberto's dignity and detailed knowledge made him a powerful witness. The afternoon brought surprise testimony from Ellen Steinman. I didn't want to speak, she admitted. Mr. Moore holds the mortgage on my ranch, but what he's done isn't right. He offered to forgive my debt if I testified for him. I refused. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Moore's face darkened. You have proof of this offer? Judge Harriman asked sharply. Ellen produced a letter in Moore's own hand. More gasps. Finally, Whitfield called Hawk. The courtroom stirred uneasily as the Apache took the stand. State your name for the record. The judge instructed. Nalnish called Hawk by. He glanced at Ellie. By friends. You're Apache? Yes. And you've been residing at the Rollins Ranch? Yes, I help with water finding, farming. Whitfield led him through testimony about traditional water knowledge, the new well, the cooperation with neighboring ranches. Hawk spoke carefully but with quiet authority. Ashford's cross-examination was brutal. You're Apache. Your people raided settlements, stole cattle, murdered innocent. Objection, Whitfield shot up. Relevance. Mr. Ashford. Judge Harriman warned, stick to matters pertaining to water rights. But the damage was done. Several jurors looked uncomfortable. You claim to have found water where experienced well diggers failed. Ashford continued. Convenient, wasn't it? Almost like magic. Not magic. Knowledge. Observation. What your people call science. Science. Ashford's tone dripped skepticism. And Mrs. Rollins just happened to save your life, and you just happened to save her ranch. Hawk met his gaze steadily. Yes, sometimes good things happen even in bad times. During a recess, Ellie found Jake Cotter lurking near the courtroom door. He grabbed her arm as she passed. You should have taken Moore's offer, he hissed. Still time to reconsider. Hawk appeared silently beside them. Cotter released her arm quickly. No second chances after today, Cotter warned before disappearing into the crowd. When court resumed, Ellie herself took the stand. She testified about Samuel's death, the mysterious drying of the creek, Moore's escalating pressure to sell. The night of the stampede, Whitfield prompted. Tell the court what happened. She described the midnight attack, how Hawk's quick thinking had saved the ranch. I found this at the scene. She produced the silver spur. Jake Cotter wears spurs exactly like this. Objection circumstantial. Overruled. Continue. Mrs. Rollins. Mr. Moore wanted my land. When I wouldn't sell, he took my water. When I survived that, he tried to destroy everything I'd built. Ashford's cross-examination was harsh. You harbored a hostile Apache. You refused to accept generous offers for worthless land. You've turned neighbor against neighbor with these baseless accusations. Baseless, Ellie's temper flared. Is that dam baseless? Are the dry wells downstream baseless? Are the cattle tracks leading from Moore's ranch baseless? You're an emotional widow, overwhelmed by circumstances. I'm a rancher fighting for survival against a man who thinks money puts him above the law. Your Honor, Ashford protested. Both of you. Enough. Harriman looked tired. Any further witnesses? That's when Sheriff Whelan stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, I'd like to testify. Shock rippled through the room. Moore half rose from his seat, face furious. Whelan took the stand, looking uncomfortable but determined. I've been sheriff here 8 years. In that time, I've overlooked certain activities, accepted certain considerations. Sheriff, the judge warned. You're aware you're incriminating yourself. I am, but last night, Jake Cotter came to me, offered me $500 to arrest the Apache again. Any pretext. Said if I didn't, there'd be an accident at my home, my wife, my children. His voice broke. I've done wrong, but I won't be party to threatening families. The courtroom erupted. Moore was on his feet, shouting at his lawyers. Cotter tried to leave but found his way blocked by townsfolk. Order. Harriman pounded his gavel. Sheriff Whelan, you're prepared to testify about other illegal activities. I am. The stampede was ordered by Moore. The creek was diverted last spring, right after Sam Rollins died. There's more intimidation, bribes, forged documents. When Whelan finished, the courtroom was dead silent. Moore's face had gone from red to ashen. Judge Harriman retired to consider. The weight felt eternal. When he returned, his expression was grave. The evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Moore, you've violated territorial water law, federal statutes, and basic principles of justice. I order the immediate removal of your illegal dam. You'll pay damages to all affected parties. Criminal charges will be filed separately. He continued. Furthermore, the new water cooperative formed by Mrs. Rollins and her neighbors is recognized as legitimate. Mr. Hawk's status as agricultural consultant is upheld, with permanent residency to be reviewed by federal authorities. The courtroom exploded again, this time in celebration. Ellie felt Hawk's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. But Moore wasn't finished. As people celebrated, he pushed close to Ellie. This isn't over, he snarled. You think you've won, I'll burn that ranch to the ground before... No. Sheriff Whelan, looking older but somehow stronger, stepped between them. You're under arrest, Jedediah. Making threats in front of 50 witnesses ain't your smartest move. As Moore was led away, still shouting, Ellie felt her knees go weak. They'd won, against all odds. They'd actually won. Outside the courthouse, neighbors crowded around. Offering congratulations, the Gonzalez family embraced her. Ellen Steinman was crying with relief. Water will flow again. Don Roberto said solemnly, justice flows with it. Hawk stood apart, watching. When Ellie finally broke free and approached him, he said quietly, You did this, not me, you. We did this together. That evening, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Tomorrow would bring work, removing the dam, restoring the creek, building the cooperative. But tonight, there was peace. Judge said federal authorities will review your status, Ellie said carefully. I heard. Are you worried? No. He carved another piece of wood. Movements steady. This is home now. You taught me that. Home isn't just where you're from. It's where you choose to stand and fight. And where you choose to stay. He looked at her then. Really looked at her? Yes, where you choose to stay. The stars were coming out, bright in the clear desert air. Somewhere in the distance. Water was already finding its way back to its true course. And on a porch in New Mexico, two unlikely partners sat together, planning a future neither could have imagined. The desert had tested them with drought and violence, but they'd learned its lessons well. In a land where water meant life, they'd found something even more precious, the strength that comes from standing together against all odds. The morning after the trial, Cedar Creek began flowing again. Ellie stood at the edge of her property, watching the water return to its ancient path. First a trickle, then a steady stream as Moore's dam came down under the supervision of federal engineers, like watching the land come back to life. Tom Hendricks said, joining her, behind them, dozens of neighbors had gathered for the momentous occasion. Hawk knelt by the water's edge, cupping some in his hands and letting it run through his fingers. "Water remembers," he said simply. "Always finds its way home." Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. With the creek restored and the new wells producing steadily, the valley bloomed. The cooperative Ellie had founded grew stronger, members sharing knowledge, tools, and labor. The Three Sisters planting method Hawk had taught spread from ranch to ranch, yields improving dramatically. Ellie's own land showed the change most strikingly. Where once there had been dusty, struggling crops, now corn stood tall, beans climbed vigorously, and squash spread its broad leaves to conserve moisture. The new irrigation channels Hawk had designed carried water efficiently to every corner of the property. One afternoon, while working on expanding the garden, Sheriff Whelan rode up. He looked different, older but somehow lighter, as if confessing his corruption had lifted a physical weight. And "Mrs. Rollins, Hawk," he greeted them. "Thought you should know. Moore's trial is set for next month. Federal prosecutors say it's one of the biggest water theft cases they've seen." "What about his ranch?" Ellie asked. "Being broken up, court ordered it sold in parcels to pay damages. Several of the Mexican families are pooling resources to buy back their ancestral lands." He paused. "There's a section bordering your property, prime grazing land with good water access. You interested?" Ellie glanced at Hawk. They'd discussed this possibility. "We might be. What's the asking price?" The number Whelan quoted was reasonable. With the compensation from the lawsuit and the increased productivity of her land, she could manage it. "Think about it." Whelan said, "Oh, an Hawk letter came for you from the Bureau of Indian Affairs." Hawk took the envelope with steady hands, though Ellie saw the tension in his shoulders. They'd been waiting for this. The federal decision on his residency status. After Whelan left, they sat on the porch to read it together. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. Hawk was granted permanent residency status as an agricultural consultant essential to territorial development. "You can stay," Ellie breathed. "Legally," he added, a rare full smile crossing his face. "No more hiding, no more fear." That evening, the cooperative held its first official meeting at Ellie's ranch. The barn was packed with neighbors, Anglo, Mexican, even a few Chinese families from the railroad camps who decided to try farming. "We need to elect officers." Tom Hendricks announced, "I nominate Ellie Rollins for president." Seconded, called Ellen Steinman. "And Hawk for water management director." Don Roberto added, "He has the knowledge we need." There were murmurs. An Apache in an official position was unprecedented. But when the vote came, it was unanimous. As the meeting progressed, planning shared resources and spring planting, Ellie marveled at the change. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate widow about to lose everything. Now she stood at the center of a thriving community. After everyone left, she and Hawk walked to the rise where Samuel was buried. She'd been avoiding this, but it felt necessary now. "I think he'd be surprised," she said softly, looking at the simple headstone. "Maybe not pleased at first. He had firm ideas about Indians. But seeing the land prosper, seeing what we've built, I think he'd come around." "He loved the land," Hawk observed. "Just didn't know how to listen to it. You learned. That honors him." They stood quietly as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Finally, Ellie asked the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. "What are we, Hawk partners, friends?" "Something else?" He was silent for a long moment. "In my culture, when two people survive great trials together, share water, defend same land, there's a bond, deeper than blood, stronger than law. Don't know your word for it." "I don't think we have one," Ellie admitted. "Maybe we need to make our own word. Or just live it, without naming." She turned to face him fully. Could you live here, truly not just as my consultant or partner, but here, in this house, with me?" His dark eyes searched hers. "Your people wouldn't understand. My people, if I found them, wouldn't understand." "I'm not asking about other people." "Then, yes." The word was simple, certain. "Already do live here. With you, just been pretending otherwise." That night, they made changes. Hawk's belongings, few as they were, moved from the barn to the house. It felt natural, like water finding its level. They were careful, respectful of each other's spaces and silences. But the boundaries that had kept them apart dissolved like morning mist. Spring brought the promise of abundance. The expanded ranch. They'd bought the section of Moore's land, supported larger herds. The creek ran strong. The wells never failed. And the cooperative's shared knowledge made everyone prosper. "We should rename the ranch," Ellie suggested one morning, watching their cattle graze in the dawn light. "Not Iron Root anymore." "That was Samuel's name. This is something new." She thought for a moment. "Two Creeks Ranch, for the water we found and the water we reclaimed." Hawk nodded approval. "Good name, true name." They hired help Miguel Gonzalez and his brother, eager to learn Hawk's water-finding techniques. The house expanded too. New rooms added with thick adobe walls and deep-set windows that caught the breeze. One evening, as they sat on the enlarged porch watching thunderclouds build over the mountains, Hawk presented her with something wrapped in soft leather. "Anniversary," he said at her questioning look. "1 year since you pulled me from the canyon." Inside was a necklace, turquoise and silver, beautifully crafted. "Made it myself," he said quietly. Remembered the old ways. "It's beautiful." She let him fasten it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. "I didn't get you anything. You gave me life, then purpose, then home." He settled back beside her. "No gift compares." The rain came that night, steady and nourishing. They sat together, listening to it drum on the roof, watching it fill the channels and cisterns they'd built. The desert drank deeply, and in the morning, wildflowers would begin their brief, glorious blooming. "Strange journey," Hawk mused. "Apache warrior and widow rancher." "Former warrior, former widow," Ellie corrected. "Now we're something else." "What?" She considered. "Desert dwellers, water guardians, survivors who became builders." "I like that," he said, taking her hand. The ranch prospered. The cooperative grew. Other communities sent representatives to learn their methods. Articles appeared in territorial newspapers about the miracle of Cedar Creek and the unusual partnership at its heart. Not everyone approved. Some folks still crossed the street when Hawk came to town. Some muttered about that woman and her Apache. But respect for results eventually outweighed prejudice, mostly. Years later, when photographers came to document the new agriculture of the Southwest, they captured an image that would become iconic. Ellie and Hawk standing before their flourishing fields, the creek running strong behind them, mountains rising in the distance, two people who shouldn't have been partners, on land that shouldn't have bloomed, creating abundance where there had been only dust and debt. The caption would read, "Two Creeks Ranch where water and wisdom meet." But for now, in this moment, they were simply two people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to stay. The storms would come again, they always did in the desert, but they would weather them together, as they had everything else. Water calls to water, Hawk had taught her. Heart calls to heart, she had learned on her own. And in the high desert of New Mexico, under vast and starlit skies, both calls had been answered. Thank you so much for listening to this story of courage, survival, and unlikely partnership in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these authentic frontier tales, please hit the hype button to boost this video. Your support means everything and helps keep these stories of the American West alive for everyone to enjoy.